Hi everybody, welcome to Plant Delights Nursery at the Juniper Level Botanic Garden. My name is Meghan Fidler. I'm the nursery manager here, and I got really lucky when Tony found me. I'm actually a cultural anthropologist by training, and I worked a lot with people, plants, and technologies, specialized in East Asia. And that's how you come across ethnobotany. So when you think about a lot of stuff today, you get a lot of terms coming out. Things like GMO, genetically modified crop or modified organism. But to tell you the truth, if they're doing it in the lab, okay, I can see that label, maybe, but we've been doing it for years with crops all the time. Did you guys know that corn used to be this big until we started selectively choosing the kernels to get that bigger crop? Did you guys know that all of your roses, those beautiful long stem roses that you get, don't have any smell anymore? They were actually bred to have that long stem, have that beautiful flower, and in doing so, it actually got rid of the scent. They perfume them now. So ethnobotany is the study of the relationship that we have with plants and the way that we use them in technology. And that can be soaps, dyes, papers, tannins, a whole bunch of different ingredients, our fabrics, but it can also be in the way that we talk about plants and the way that we understand them. Who here has a plant or something in their garden that has a historical meaning or something special for their family? Tell me one.
Oh, a rose.
A rose?
My mom's.
It was your mom's rose? How about you?
Basil.
Basil?
You gotta have 3 kinds of basil, minimum.
Why?
And both kinds of parsley.
And both kinds of parsley.
Sure, because that way you can get a well-rounded, flavorful pesto.
That's great. Anybody else? Yes.
My grandma's hosta.
Your grandma's hosta. I love that. Do you know what kind it is? I have one too. I have a peony that I dragged back from my original farmhouse I grew up on as a little kid. It's gone with me my entire life. I actually had 8, I believe, to begin with, and I gave a couple to my sisters, and my sisters don't grow things as well as I do. I have one left, and it's an old school peony. I think I've identified it actually from the Sears catalog that you could order them in, but I still haven't got a straight plant name, but it's been with me my whole life. When we're talking about plants and we're living with them, often the stories and the experiences that we have with them shape our lives with the actual object. And you can tell that in linguistics, in that when you have a plant that's really important for a culture, it gets lots of different names. It gets a lot of different differentiation. Like this one has a little purple, this one's shorter, and we're going to give it a different title. For example, most cultures don't just say snake. They actually have lots of different names for snakes, and that's because it's important to know who might bite you and you might die. The same thing with plants. So the more of the generic terms that you get, the more differentiation demonstrates how important it is to the culture. There are a number of plants that have really great uses. If you peek right back here, if you see that plant with the little white flowers hanging off it, that's an Edgeworthia. It's a snow cream. And that's actually called in Japan the Mitsumata. And that's the one that actually makes the washi. Has anybody seen washi paper before? It's that really pretty paper that they use for origami. It's the one that's got the gold print on it. So that plant becomes really, really important. Also in Japan is the actual chrysanthemum. If you look at everybody's kimonos, there's actually a flower for the emperor's kimono. That is the chrysanthemum. The chrysanthemum is the emperor's plant, and it actually had a regal status. Same thing if we're going to talk about a number of other plants, including things that came from Europe. There are also a bunch of medicinal purposes. For most groups of people, a lot of the early medicine was kept in midwifery. So there wasn't really a high set of doctors. Most of those were doing other things. So this kind of plant knowledge tended to stay with women. In fact, if you know about the snake root around here, when the Europeans first came and they brought their cattle, there's a weed, it's called snake root, and it's got a little white flower on it. As the cattle were grazing, they ate this. It didn't hurt them. but the toxins in that flour built up within the cow's milk, and then as people were drinking it, they were dying. And it was a midwife working with a Native American who's never truly been named that figured out that they can't eat that particular plant because it's building up in the proteins of the milk, and that's what's wiping everybody out. Well, so it was a great adventure, and those kind of exchanges between cultures and people are how we got the blue indigo dyes, how we got the royal purple dyes, how we got lots of these other things that we use every day and take for granted. Out front here we have a rue plant, for example, and rue was used for a long time in midwifery to help to control the feminine processes, whether that be having your menstrual cycle or having a birth. It was a very important plant, and a lot of guys didn't know about it, except if they pulled it out, they got a little rash on their fingers. The food-based plants, like over here we have the apuncha. The way to clean those and work with those, right now most of ours are ornamental, but in reality that was a very important food source for many people that were down south. The agave are also the same way. So agave, if you've noticed, everyone suddenly likes a tequila bar. Everybody likes mezcal. These plants have a core in the middle of them, and after they reach a certain age, people go and core them out and put them into barrels, and that's how you get that kind of liquor. In fact, it's so popular now that China and Japan have picked up on it. That plant is becoming a little hard to find in the wild. It's becoming a little endangered because people are going out and being like, I can make $1 million if I get my mezcal just right, and they'll core those guys out, and once you core them, they're gone. So there's a whole lot of different relationships that we have with plants, beneficial and non-beneficial. And ethnobotany, as a very basic introduction with everybody here, is actually the study of how people relate to plants. What are your personal family stories? What's the town story? What's the names that you tend to use? How are the plants being used? Are they being used for medicine, for clothing, for tanning, for soaps? And how does that production actually change the way the plant performs over time, or our selection of the seeds? The last example I'd like to give you is our tomato crops. I started with the GMO crops. There was a bunch of people that were working on the tomato blight wilt that we get all over the place here. And they went down into Mexico, and they found all of these wonderful farmers that had been working with this plant for generations, hundreds of years. And they had been selecting the plants that were resistant to that wilt. And these guys came down there and recognized it. And what they did is they bought the fruit. And they took the seeds. And they brought them back up here, patented them, charged the people they got them from because they had a patented plant, and then made a big crop that was much more resistant and much more floriferous here in the United States. Those kinds of entanglements are really important to know, and we face that every day here at Plant Delights because our proprietor, Tony Avent, loves to share rare plant genetics, right? And so some people are like, no, we don't need to share those. But for us, the more that we share, rather than charging or patenting or making it a proprietary knowledge, the better off we're all going to be. So that's a basic introduction. There'll be longer classes later on. I wanted to stay in one spot so that we all didn't walk around in the sun. If you guys have any questions about plants in the garden, I have a whole lot of stories about darn near every single one of them. So please feel free to ask away, and if you have any stories from yourselves to share about plants, I'd really love to hear them.
Well, the Tar Heel today.
The what?
Tar Heel, the tar pine.
The tar pine, yeah.
Turpentine.
Yep.
Well, this neighborhood, this area is Juniper Level, juniper trees, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the developers came and leveled them. So that's how
Probably.
And the juniper berries go into gin.
Right.
Do you have any sloes?
No, I don't recognize it.
An actual plant that the fruit of it is called a sloe, S-L-O-E. And that's where you get sloe gin.
Oh, nice.
Because they use that plus the juniper berries to make the gin.
And it's in crossword puzzles all the time.
Oh, is it?
What did the tar heel, where did that come from? What is that?
Turpentine pine.
So there's a longleaf pine, and actually we now have a whole bunch we've got some fossils of it from campus over here. So the longleaf pine actually has turpentine in it. So when it dies and it stays underground, it actually preserves itself. And I have a couple of stumps. I admit they're absolutely wonderful, and we've got a bunch of preserved ones over here that have turned to stone. The latent term for it, remember I said if you've got lots of different terms, it's important, is lighter wood. So you can take that piece of wood and you cut a little tiny sliver off it and you just spark it a little bit and it'll automatically start to burn. And that's how a lot of people started their fires around here. That's how it was a very basic element for all cooking kitchens, is to have a little sliver of lighter wood, because the turpentine in the actual pine itself made it very flammable, which also means it's preserved. So you'll find these big pine roots here that are just absolutely massive. If you scratch it, you'll be able to smell it. You'll be able to smell that that plant actually has a lighting ignition or
Turpentine smell is right there.
yeah.
Is that where the term tar heels is?
Now that I don't know. That's a good question. Do you think that's
They
correct?
made a tar for the ships and the boats and
Yep.
stuff out of the pine sap.
That's,
Oh, there you go.
it was the turpentine was rendered down to get the tar. Sorry, I'm a Navy.
I love it. I'm happy.
Yeah, back in the colonial days and up through the when we started doing ironclads, the very last thing before the ship was taken out of dry dock was that the whole outer part of the hull was covered in tar, in pine tar specifically. And so the Navy had contracts all through the Carolinas with different plantation owners for turpentine and tar for the military, and then to caulk the boards on board ship, they had a supply of tar, pine tar, and they would unravel old rope, which was then called oakum, and they would drench it in this pine tar and pound it into between the boards of the ship, which is how come ships were so flammable. You really needed to have fire aboard ship. It was.
Well, if you know that, have anybody here been to New Jersey?
Yeah.
No, not yet.
Up there, the Pine Barrens.
Pine Barrens.
So the Pine Barrens is a very sandy, very low level, filled with little tiny rivers running up there in New Jersey. It is an exquisite place to visit. There's tons of little beavers. I think they're cute, so yeah, you know. I know they're a little stinky, but that's okay. Tons of little rivers. There's all of these little miniature pines. They're like just about this big, and they look like full tree size. This area is protected because people like to dig those up because of bonsai, right? So we don't want to actually ruin that natural resource. Through those rivers, there's so many pine trees that pine trees actually drop their needles and they release something called tannin.
Yep.
So if you all know about acorns and walnuts and pecans, you know they're changing the pH of your soil, it does things. Tannin does the same thing.
Yep.
In fact, it's so thick up there that those rivers run red with tannin.
If you canoe, you dip your canoe paddle in and take it up and it's red.
Right, that's exactly right. But the neat stuff about this tannin actually impacts your garden too. So in all the pine leaves, or pine needles, they all do release tannin. It is a natural microbe inhibitant, which means why you're putting it down in the garden is to stop weeds. And it works because the Microrhiza really have a hard time living with a high level of tannin in your soil. The Microrhiza are a fungus that has a symbiotic relationship with all plants on Earth. Without them, all plants would be about knee high. And that's because plants, through photosynthesis, can't make protein and they can't make minerals. So these little funguses worm around and they crawl up to the top of the soil and they get in the leaf litter. And there's this little tiny bug that eats old leaves called a springtail. And if you see them, they flick themselves up and go and do in flips. That's why they're called a springtail. And they'll sit in the leaf, the Microrhiza will, and the springtail will eat them, and the Microrhiza will eat them from the inside out, and then call to its friends and rejoin the colony. And then they mine through rocks and they get the minerals from those rocks. And then they go over to a tree or a bush and they say, knock, knock, knock on your roots. You can make sugars and starches. I can't, but I've got minerals and protein. Do you want to trade? And these mycorrhizal colonies connect forests across everything. And there's new research showing that if one tree starts to die, it doesn't matter if it's got its other seedlings, if it's the same sort of tree, it could be any tree. It will give all its sugars and starches down through those mycorrhizal roots and distribute them back through the forest. Most trees want to be in a forest. What tannin does, however, is makes it really hard for those mycorrhiza to live. So when you go ahead and put all of your pine fines or the pine straw, thank you, out in your garden, you're doing a great job of keeping weeds out, but you're also keeping something else out. And back to the ships and the pine barrens, when we were crossing the ocean, the ships that were going to Europe would make a special stop, people, plants, and technology, in the pine barrens and fill up all of their water barrels with this red resinous water and pack it up and go across sea, because no bacteria, no microbes. It's a microbe inhibited. So they had clean distilled water in a big barrel for the whole trip, and they didn't have to worry about getting sick off it, just because of that plant's tendencies and how it reacts with different things.
Wow.
Yeah, fun. So yeah, you got me inspired.
So then the Microrhiza, and that relates to the mushrooms.
It's there is a delineation between the two that I am not confident enough to speak on, but yes, they are very similar.
Okay, because I know that mushrooms are the fruiting part.
So there's mycorrhiza and mycelium.
Yeah.
Mycelia is the one I'm thinking of. Okay, and that does pretty much the same thing.
Well,
With communication between the
okay. Yep. All right. Sure.
okay. There we go.
So the tar heel again, it goes back to the Longleaf Pine.
Yeah.
Where it starts from.
Yeah. So we have a whole lot of loblolly pine around here. Like I believe that's one in the far back over my greenhouse. The longleaf you'll see has a very different shape. Yeah, that's something different. Yeah. Has a very different shape. It does have a very longer needle, and they're neat. You'll know them when you see them. They look very different than the actual loblolly.
Good for, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have those in the mountains? The longleaf?
Yes, some up into the mountains. This area was the most common area for them. In fact, like I said, I'll show you the fossils we have. This whole property before it became a tobacco farm, which was before Tony bought it and made it into this wonderful botanical garden, which, because it was a tobacco farm, means we have some root knot nematodes, particularly right here in this bed, in our garden bed here. So we're constantly trying to keep our plants happy right here, because that's what tobacco tend to collect. It's in the soil now. So what you gonna do? We're gonna keep the garden as good as possible, and we're working on a whole bunch of different solutions. But yeah, the longleaf pines were all through here, so they were really cool. And you'll see the petrified wood over there. It's neat.
Yeah, when they were excavating the pond, they found petrified pine, cedar, and also palms.
Yeah.
And actually, the log that they're sitting on is a piece of petrified wood. Try to pick it up.
This is a spruce.
This is Deodar cedar.
Deodar cedar.
That's a cedar.
That big.
Yes, ma'am.
You're welcome. You guys keep it. If you have any stories ever about plants or what you're doing with them, or somebody a plant that matters to you, always try to find me. I love them. I love hearing that stuff. It makes me really excited.
I have a quick puzzle for you.
What? Uh-oh.
What's the largest living organism in the world?
I know!
Oh, you be quiet. I know you know.
The largest living organism, I believe, is the big trees on the Pacific Northwest. What is it?
It's a creosote bush. Out in the middle.
Oh, that's right, because it's all underneath the...
It's actually mushrooms. And mushrooms that are all connected together for miles under the soil.
There's a bunch that's almost that big in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was close then. I was close.
If you ever get to go to the redwood forests out in California.
Oh, I have.
Okay.
They're exquisite.
Did they have you stomp on the ground?
I don't remember.
I don't remember.
Okay. If you're in a redwood grove and you stomp on the ground, it's going to boom like a bass drum. And that's because there's as much root down and out as there is tree up. Oh my gosh. So, and there will always be a mommy tree and a host of daughter trees around it, but they're all interconnected, mycelia and microzoa wise, in the ground, and it booms every time, and that's how you can tell you're really in the redwoods, is the ground will boom.
The redwoods are also a very interesting plant, is because if one side of the plant gets stressed, the plant will reach out with a secondary growth and send it down like this. And it'll start, like I said, they were sending the starch and sugars. They'll send all its energy to that new growth till it hits the ground, and then it'll give up on the tree that's gotten burned or the roots have gotten crushed, and it's given itself basically a brand new clone. So sometimes when you're looking at those trees, you can't tell how old they are because you don't know when they clone themselves. So you
have to core the roots.
Yep. No. Yep.
Have you ever been to the Sequoia National Forest?
I have, and it blew my mind. Yes.
I lived there.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.